Hi all, this is Waldemar from Better Your Chess. It is time for another one of my over-the-board chess adventures. I've been on a bit of a roll lately, so I'm happy to show you another one of my recent wins. This game was played for my club Zoekerdort Amstelveen against Wijk from Zaanstad. I am playing black. Now my opponent's up the game with e4 and I respond classically with e5, and after knight f3 I opt for knight f6, the Petrov defense, which is one of my favorite defenses. And no, I hardly ever play dull games with it. And now, as so often, my opponents don't like to be confronted with the Petrov and my possible theoretical knowledge of it, and hope to transpose into another type of game. And in about 50% of my Petrov games so far, over the past few years, they have played here knight c3. Now, they hope to transpose into a 4 knights game, which could happen if I would now play knight c6, but I don't comply. I play bishop b4 and I want to give the game a more independent character. Now White plays bishop c4, which is one of the more common replies. Then soon-to-be Grandmaster Jordan van Foreest played this against me, I think it was about 2 years ago in Haarlem, but he could not crack my defenses. Now I play bishop takes c3. This is the idea. Black brings about a few imbalances with this exchange. And in this respect it reminds us of the Hübner variation from the Nimzo-Indian, where black also voluntarily exchanges his dark square bishop on c3, even without being prompted after white plays a2, a3. Bobby Fischer played a famous game with that line against Spassky during their 1972 World Chess Championship match and won with black. I recommend you look up that game. Okay, now there are two ways in which white can recapture. Obviously there is b takes c3, but the proper reply here is d takes c3. And I just said something about bringing about imbalances. Now then, what are these imbalances? If we speak of imbalances, we always try to look at the differences in both positions. So, what are the favorite imbalances for whites and which ones are favorable for black? Now, if we take a look at the favorable imbalances for white, then by exchanging one of his bishops, black has given white the bishop pair, and on the mid-term to longer term this is of course an advantage, so white has the bishop pair. But in return black was able to double white's c-pawns, and they normally constitute a weakness. Also now the pawn on e4 is vulnerable, it's not even protected at the moment. So black can try to aim his pieces at these weaknesses on e4 and possibly also c2 and c3. So, but in order to suffer not too much from the loss of the dark squared bishop, black will try to put all his pawns, or at least many of his pawns, on dark squares, so that he has a strong and healthy pawn chain, and that he can at least counterbalance some of the dark square control that he has left in white's hands, because white is the only one left with a dark square bishop. So that is important. Now this does not mean that black immediately has some sort of an advantage, of course not. It's just that bringing about imbalances also gives you better chances to try and win the game. Now there's something else we can say about the exchange of the bishop on c3. The exchange of bishop versus knight in general is one of the most important types of exchanges in chess. This is also something that is stressed very often by American chess grandmaster Maurice Ashley. He does it very often during his live commentary shows. You may want to look up those shows. And he very fervently talks about these exchanges. And he explains that that as soon as you give up your bishop, you strive for control of the other color complex. So in this case I give up my dark squared bishop. That means I strive for control of the light squares. And in taking the knight on c3, that really helps, because the knight on c3, the knight in general, is a piece that can control light squares. And now it doesn't anymore. Of course, and let me stress that again, I need to be careful that I will not be overrun on the other color complex, which in this case is the dark squares. So fortunately for black, he has the possibility of building a pawn chain on the dark squares here, so as to try and stay at least a little bit healthy in that respect as well. So obviously I play here d6. Let's not forget that my e5 pawn was also unprotected here, but d6 is of course a very nice move to play. And we can see that it also opens up the light square bishop, and my game is going to be about light square control. And in order to control the light squares, my knights need to be on dark squares. So this one is already sitting here quite nicely, hitting a light square. And this one may go to c5, from where it also is hitting a lot of light squares. Now, let's see to what extent white will allow me to execute this plan of development. Okay, back to the game. Now my opponent played h3. And apparently he doesn't want my bishop to come to f3 and pin the knight. But I don't think that this pin is dangerous. If my bishop were to appear on g4, white could always play queen d3 and unpin the knight. And maybe then later chase the bishop. But also there is no real threat attached to the idea of bishop g4. So I don't really like the fact that he spends a tempo on playing h2, h3. So now I play knight b d7, and I'm already preparing to bring my knight to this dark square on c5. Okay, now white has a dark square bishop, and he develops it and he pins my knight on f6. But this is also normally not a very dangerous pin. Since I have not castled yet, I can always consider ideas of h6 and g5, pushing away the bishop and solving the problem of the pin in a very mechanical way. Also, I can just try and keep the knights here for the moment, when this guy is just very safely protecting this one. And there is also sometimes the opportunity of harassing the bishop on g5 with such moves as knight c5, e6, and then try and take it from there. Okay, but yeah, white has to defend his pieces. He does so with bishop g5, and by bringing about the pin, even though it's not a dangerous pin, he is asking me the question, so in the long run, how do you want to deal with that pin? And it will cause me a little bit of headache and some time, of course, to play moves around this pin. Well, I start first with h6, pushing the bishop to a less favorable diagonal. On h4 it can no longer retreat to, let's say, e3, from where it would also be eyeing black's queen side. So the bishop on h4 is on a less favorable square, and in that sense I'm putting another pawn on dark squares so as to play against the dark square bishop. So now after bishop h4, I play knight c5, and there's also another idea attached to this knight c5, and we will see that in a moment. Now the first idea of knight c5 is that now I'm attacking the pawn on e4. I could not take that pawn earlier because of course I was pinned by the bishop on g5. And I think I forgot to point out why I also could not take it after this move here, d6 and h3. If I now were to play knight takes e4, then that would not be very good, because I haven't castled yet. And now my knight is unprotected, and in that sense it is a target. But also the pawn on f7 is a target, because it is also unprotected in the sense that it is attacked once and defended defended once, so it only needs one extra attacker to put that piece under immediate pressure. And of course white would play here the double attack queen d5, immediately winning the game, because he's threatening to checkmate me or to simply win my knight. So I can also not try and capitalize on the weakness on e4 too soon, so I have to prepare this. But of course the pawn on e4 does not have any natural protection from the pawn on d3, and it won't go away anytime soon and will need protection from white's pieces. So this is where I hope to develop my slight strategical initiative in that sense. Okay, back to the game, where after bishop g5 h6, bishop h4, knight c5 was played. And now I still cannot really play knight takes e4, but I'm threatening now g5, which would resolve the pin, free up this knight, and then I really would be able to take on e4, for instance with this knight. Because white does not have the queen d5 trick in that position, my knight would simply be defending the d5 square. So now white's pawn on e4 is in danger, and white solves that problem with knight d2. Now of course this is a little bit of a passive move, so in that sense it's also a bit of a success for me. The queen is now blocked over the d file, and of course white's knight is not sitting so nicely now on d2. It's fulfilling defensive duties. Now one of the other ideas here of knight c5 is to now play bishop e6, and just toying with the idea of simply taking away white's pair of bishops. If we can exchange the bishops of the light squares, then white will not have a plan to break open the position in the middle game and use his long-range bishop pair to somehow start an initiative against my position. So yeah, that would be very good for me. Now white doesn't really want to lose time now by retreating the bishop to, for instance, e2. That would be another passive move. Instead he prefers to play queen e2, and of course this gives me the opportunity to take his bishop, and I think I should have done that. I think that the most common way for me to go about it would be then to say, okay, thank you, I will exchange off your pair of bishops, and after queen c4 just go castles, and I would have a very healthy position. Several ways again for me to try and deal with the pin of the bishop on my knight on f6. One option would again be to try and play g7, g5, because I'm quite safe on the king side. I could then also always move up my king to g7, and when the bishop would go to g3 and white would try and attack my pawn on g5 with h5, h4, I could simply contest that h-file with rook h8, and I would be perfectly fine there. In fact, I think I would be better, because I don't really like white's bishop there. It's hemmed in by my strong pawn position on the dark squares. Still, I would have two knights that are sitting on good squares. So I think I should have done that, but somehow maybe I didn't realize in that particular moment that I could just exchange off white's pair of bishops. Where were my thoughts? What was I thinking? But I guess that I was also somehow a little bit more ambitious, and I also wanted to keep black guessing, white guessing, as to where I would develop my king. And I played here queen e7, but I think it was an inaccuracy. Because now white played a strong and forcing move. He played here b4, asking the question to my knight. Now, I tried to find ways in which I would not have to retreat my knight to d7. One of the ways was to play knight a4 and immediately attack one of these weaknesses, the double pawns on c3. But the quote-unquote problem in this position is that I have not castled yet, and there is this bishop b5 check move, and after bishop d7 white can now interpose bishop takes f6, and in this case we can really see that my queen is overworked, because if I were to take that bishop with my queen, which I want, then bishop takes d7 and I would have to recapture that bishop with my king, and my king would have been living in the center of the board for the rest of the game. So I'm really forced here to recapture g takes f6, but then after b takes a4 and bishop takes a4, knight f1, we see that positions are probably equal and that white has a very nice plan of playing here, for instance after castles queenside, knight e3, headed for the weakness here on f5. Now it is not such a terrible weakness, because I can always protect that square with my bishop, but yeah, if we were to exchange also bishop for knight here, then I think the position will become quite dry, and this was not something that I was aiming for straight out of the opening. So after b4 I didn't really like the idea of going knight a4. So then I normally looked at bishop takes c4, and then after queen takes c4 to try and go knight e6, which would be a very decent square for the knight. In this case I would not have to retreat to d7 where I just came from, but I could say, listen, I've exchanged bishops, and now I'm using the e6 square as a pivot for my knight. I'm still not retreating the knight, but putting the knight on continuously better squares. I can also jump maybe later to the f4 square, put pressure on white's position in that respect. But again, here there would be bishop takes f6, and now the thing is that if I want to keep my pawn structure intact with queen takes f6, there is again a check, because I haven't castled with queen b5. Now I still didn't stop calculating here, because going pawn hunting so soon in the opening may not be the very best thing that white can do. I could, for instance, continue here with c6, and I analyzed queen takes b7, now castles. But yeah, I wasn't sure about this pawn sacrifice, and I wasn't sure if I would have enough compensation. Maybe I would, but also this was not really what I was aiming for straight out of the opening. And after queen a6, aiming to bring back the queen home, I guess maybe the positions are equal. Of course I can play something like d5 in the center and pose some problems maybe to my opponent, but I didn't really like it. Now I did notice that white could make a mistake here with queen takes c6, and then I would really get quite a lot of activity with queen d6 and rook c3 and so on. But I wasn't sure if white would fall for that, to be honest. And also I still think that the position was a little bit double-edged, sacrificing two pawns, and that was, to be honest, a little bit too difficult for me to judge correctly. So after b4 I opted for the somewhat pitiful retreat, knight c goes to d7. But since white has played b2 before, weakening his c3 square and also putting out the pawn on b4 as some sort of a sore thumb, I could also somehow justify this retreat, because now that the pawn is on b4, it gives me a pawn lever. And very typical in these positions is then for black to go a7, e5 to try and involve the rooks in the game as well. Of course now this move has become possible because White put his pawn on b4, right? It's that simple really. And then if White were ever to, let's say, move the pawn or exchange on a5, I would get a renewed opportunity of putting my knight on c5, and it would be slightly more eternal sitting on c5. Now, White was aware of the fact that I could play a7, a5 in this position, and that it's some sort of a strategical threat really. So he was well aware of that and played knight b3, and I thought that was a good move. He's just playing prophylactical moves against my ideas. So again, it would have been possible for me to first eliminate this bishop and with it the bishop pair, and after, let's say, queen c4, g5, bishop g3, go for queenside castles, and maybe just develop an initiative on the king side with such moves as h5, h4 and g4 and so on, and still try to make use of the fact that White no longer has a bishop pair. His pawn structure is still a little bit rigid, and also his bishop is not the best piece on the board, because obviously it is biting at the granite here in the center. But instead of exchanging the bishop pair, and I'll promise I'll better my chess in the next game, I played here castles queenside. And now my opponent took a long and deep thought, and I figured out what he was going to play. After about 20 minutes or so, he played here the interesting bishop a6, putting immediately pressure on my castled position, and one of the threats here is knight a5, when I would just be simply losing. Okay, now I didn't believe, or I couldn't believe, that this move was working, because basically you're attacking with just 3 pieces, and I still have a defender at hand, and you haven't castled yet with White. So I figured there must be a way to refute this early idea. Well, the idea to refute it was certainly not to accept the piece sacrifice, because then the queen would come in with a check. I would have to be forced to go here, and after knight a5 I really don't see how I can defend against the threatening checkmate on b7, so I would be losing this game. But of course I played something else. After bishop a6 I played the very reliable retreat knight b8, and with it I am just overprotecting this white square, and now I'm really threatening to take the bishop, because of course the queen would not be able to recapture there. Yeah, so knight a5 also doesn't work here for White, because as mentioned I would just simply take, and the queen could not join in the attack anymore. So back to the game after knight b8, where White realized that his attack was untimely and that the bishop was now under threat. So he retreated it to c4. And I think that maybe it was even a little bit better to go back to d3, where I would not be able to exchange it, so that White would still enjoy his bishop pair. But he didn't, he put it back on c4, and he may argue in turn, well, okay, so I lost time, but your knight on b8 is also not the best piece in the world, right? It's back to where it came from, so you spent a great many moves with that knight, going from b7 to d7 to c5 to d7 and back to b8, so black player, what are you doing? It's also looking quite ridiculous, of course. But now it was my turn. And since I have basically finished my development, apart from the knight on b8, which is performing very good defensive duties, by the way, it was now time for me to try and develop a middle game initiative. So I started with g5, playing against the bishop and also solving the problem, quote-unquote problem, of my pin. Of course, the bishop now had to go to g3. And again, I don't know why I didn't do it. Probably I was just hoping for white to exchange bishops, and then my queen would go to the e6 square, from where it would sit on a very good outpost. It would have great view on both queen and king side. But I didn't exchange bishops here. I now played again, as was planned all along with the exchange on c3, I started playing against the light squares with knight f to d7. Now, one of the ideas is, of course, to bring this knight to b6, to hit the light squares and to take over control of the c4 square. And also in that respect, I would really like white to take my bishop on e6, because then, as aforementioned, my queen would come to e6 and also control the c4 square. And that's not all. I'm also now enabling my f-pawn to participate in the fight for the light squares. I might also even play against the bishop and then play for some sort of a king side attack, King's Indian style, with h5 and g4. So really building my position here. So from that respect, I really liked knight f d7. But again, my opponent sensed here what I was trying to do. Earlier I wanted to play a7, a5, and he prevented that with knight b3. And now again he plays an interesting prophylactic move. He plays here a4, and with that he hopes to chase away my knight when it comes to b6. So that was very interesting. So I remember looking deeply at these lines, if maybe I could make it work after all. But after simply bishop d3, I just couldn't see how I could continue with my light square control on the queen side. Because for the moment, white is the one controlling the c4 square here. Once, twice, and if he wants to, maybe even 3 times. And my knight has to go back on the next move, because he will kick it with a4, a5. So I sat on my hands. I wanted to play something along those lines, but I didn't play it. And I just kept my knight in the more flexible spot on d7, because from there it can also always go back to f6 to pressure the e pawn, or maybe be rerouted along the f8 and g6 squares. So, but I was flexible. I didn't have to play knight b6. That was not my only plan. I now just uncorked my other plan. I played f7, f5. And, well, I don't think that the balance has been disturbed in any serious way yet. And, yeah, I felt a little bit uneasy if white were now to play f2, f3. Because f2, f3 defends the light squares, but it also enables the white bishop to go to f2, from where it would participate in the game again. It was sitting a little bit lonely there on the king side, out on a limb and not really participating in what was going on. And as soon as it reappears on the Italian diagonal g1 to a7, it also pressures my king side, that is to say my king position on the queen side, and would also hit my unprotected pawn on a7. So that's the strategic danger that is facing me, right? That's the consequence of exchanging dark square bishops. Your opponent is left with a dark square bishop, and if he can put it to good use, and this is of course the perfect diagonal for the bishop to go to, then I don't know, maybe the strategical momentum could shift again in his favor. But from here I noticed a nice trap, and I just couldn't believe that somehow I couldn't just nibble on the strategic initiative a little bit that I thought that I was developing. Now the one thing really that remains to be done, and which is also, theoretically speaking at least, a part of finishing the opening, is giving your rooks something to do. So I started here with opening up a file. F takes e4, F takes e4, and now I set up a very nice trap with rook h f8. And even if you wouldn't see that it sets up a nice trap, it's just the most natural thing you can do, right? Just bring a rook to the open file. I mean, White's king is still sitting in the center. His rooks aren't even connected. And for the moment he's not even allowed to castle kingside, and castling queenside, yeah, maybe he could do that, because it's maybe not so easy to see for me how I could get at his structure here. But of course, castling queenside, well, it is double-edged also, because they also don't make the most solid impression on me, these white queenside pawns. But my opponent saw his chance and now played bishop f2, trying really to bring back his bishop into the game. But this was the move that I had been hoping for. And I want to give you the opportunity to try and find the move that I played now. So pause the video for as long as you like, then I will count to 3, come back, and then we will compare answers. And as a matter of fact, I think I will just pause the whole recording because I want to make myself a cup of coffee. So I'll be back in a tick. You think about what I played here with black. Well, I'm back. Cheers. I got my cup of coffee. Maybe you found out what I played. Kudos to you if you found the very nice rook takes f2. An exchange, sacrifice. Whoa, this is just based on tactics. This is a tactical move, right? So far it's been a very, I wouldn't say complex, but strategical game, you know, with just this one tactical trick in between on bishop a6, and maybe that I couldn't take on e4 too quickly because then there would follow queen d5 in the opening. But now things have become really tactical. And there had been a tactical element in the game all along, and that is the tension between those two bishops. Now the bishops are attacking each other, and both bishops are also protected. That means that both sides really have to be very careful about this interaction, because it could just explode like that, right? You just need to attack the bishop a second time, and then you would be able to win the bishop. Who knows? Okay, but what does that have to do with rook takes f2, you ask? Well, simple. Let's say if I want to take the bishop on c4, but I can't do it yet because the queen is protecting the bishop, then I could lure the queen away maybe, right? So here, after queen takes f2, I would have won 2 minor pieces for the rook and would have a strategically winning position. Easy. Okay, but the point, of course, after rook takes f2 is not queen takes f2, because the queen has to keep defending the bishop on c4, but king f2. What happens after king f2? Did you see there also what happened? Probably you did. I was now able to attack the bishop for the second time with this very nasty queen f7 in between check. This is a double attack on the king, but also on the bishop. So that was a very nasty surprise for white. Now there is here queen f3, but since my bishop and queen protect each other, it was just perfectly fine for me to just take the bishop. Because if now queen takes queen, the bishop will just recapture. Absolutely no problem. Okay. By the way, it was also possible for me to play here queen takes queen, but I don't really want to exchange. Again, I want to exchange under my own, on my own terms, because here, let's say after king f3 and bishop takes c4, my bishop would end up on c4. But I don't want my bishop ending up on c4. No, rather I want it to go to g6 as quickly as possible, because from g6 the bishop is attacking something. On c4 it is sitting nicely, but only attacking heir. That's very crooked heir, by the way, this heir. And also it is vulnerable to a knight d2 move. But from g6 it wouldn't be attacking heir, it would be attacking this vulnerable pawn. And again we come back to the vulnerability of the e4 pawn. So also in this endgame-ish type of position, black should remain consistent and strive for light square control and attack white where he is weakest. So that's why I didn't take on f3 first, but immediately here on c4. Because now white's next move is queen takes f7, and that's what he played. But that means that when I recapture on f7, I can go to g6 in one move, and then follow it up with knight f6, and then the other knight can go here, which in turn protects the knight on f6, which means that the f file is also very healthily blockaded. And in the meantime I'm hitting this pawn on e4 2 times already, and surely white must crack sooner or later, especially since the imbalance of 2 minor pieces versus rook is normally, under normal circumstances, just winning. Okay, so queen f7 was played and I recaptured with the bishop. Now, quite understandably, my opponent was afraid that not my bishop would go to c4, but that still this knight would hop into c4. Now, I'm not sure if that would be the best plan, because again the knight is sitting there very prettily, but it's hitting thin air, it's not really attacking something. Of course it's standing there very dominantly and could harass white's pieces, and it would also be a way to go, I guess, but probably not the best setup for black's pieces anyway. So he played here a5, stopping my knight from going to b6 and later to c4. But now this allowed me to take up my aggressive stance on the king side. I just immediately went for the throat here, knight f6, hitting the pawn on e4. He had to protect with e3, now bishop g6, again attacking. Still, fortunately for white, he still has knight d2 handy, but again I go for light square control and I attack the pawn on e4 with d5. And now if he takes that, then also my rook will become active, right? And if he doesn't take it, I will take his pawn here on e4. So let's say the reactive defensive methods, they are all very good for black. So instead white tried to confuse the issue and went for the counterattack, which is normally the best thing to do when you're under pressure. And well, white's only trump is that he has 2 rooks instead of 1. So he could try and make use of the open f file, try and do something there, or play what he played in the game, h4, and to try and open up the h file. Now of course I don't want his rooks to enter into my camp, so I just kept everything closed. I could also take on e4, but I really liked to play here g4, just frustrating white's play on the king side. Now he played h5, just temporarily pushing my bishop to a worse square. I could take here again on e4, but I really liked my bishop and I didn't want to exchange it on e4 for his knight, for instance. So I went bishop h2. I'm still winning here, but here comes one of white's rooks, rook a to f1, but now comes the forcing knight b d7. The knights are protecting each other. Not that it is important to protect this knight, but it is much more important to protect this knight, which means that basically white's rook will never be able to break through on the f-file. They will never be able to enter on the f7 square, for instance. Yeah. The problem here again is that if white releases the tension now with a move such as e takes d5, then of course knight d5 comes with a check, and I'm also winning the c3 pawn, yes, then white may come in on the f7 square, but at too high a price. But let's not forget that I'm also hitting the c2 pawn here, so that would not really work. So yeah, white only has a choice of evils here, and he played here rook f2, trying to double up on the f-file and take my knight on f6 anyway. Well, now I played d takes e4. That's what I liked. I wanted to take with the pawn. Now the d-file is also opened up, and now I'm threatening this check. So white defended with c4, and you may have noticed also about the way I'm talking about the game now is that it has become much more concrete. It's just about tactics and calculation now, and trying to find the best forcing moves. Of course there are still some strategical considerations, but they're already more tactical in nature, such as that the knights protect each other, right? And that I'm playing against white's rooks and so on. After c4 I cannot jump into d5 with my knight, but I have another very nice and forcing move. If I cannot go to d5, then I will try and harass the king on e3 in another way, from another direction. So I play g3, not bothering too much about that pawn, because this is really all about 4 lions, 4 hyenas you could say, trying just to attack this poor king here on e3. So I just need to get to the king, so I have to open up squares, files and diagonals to get to this king. So rook f1 was played, and now knight g4 check. Well, king e2 had to be played, and there's several ways to win here, but I didn't really like so much to play e3 here, because I wanted to also involve my knight, my knight and rook into the attack. Now e3 was also winning, but I also didn't want the knight to come to f3. I thought that it was just better to keep it passively placed on d2. But okay, well, it transpires now that after such a move as bishop g8, attacking the king from a different angle, that this is just also a winning position. Of course, white can try king d3 to attack c4, but then there is this discovered attack, and yeah, this is also winning. Okay, but after knight g4 check, king e2, I played knight d f6, and now white went for my weakling on g3, but we can see, of course, that these rooks, they're not playing together, and there's absolutely no harmony anymore in the position of white's pieces, and black's pieces are all over the place now. So now I decided that it was a good moment to push e3, with this knight also a little bit closer, and of course with the d-file opened up for my rook. Now, okay, knight f3, it doesn't really matter too much anymore. Yeah. Now I played bishop takes c2, and of course I'm completely winning now, but my opponent still kept confusing me. We were in time trouble, so I had to play another, 5 moves to get to the time control. And now he played knight takes e5. And that simply sacrifices the piece, right? I could take that knight, but if I take that knight, like so, then at least white has a choice of getting rid of this knight, or maybe even of this very strong, nasty passed pawn. Now this would have won as well, but I don't think it would have been the strongest way to go about it. So instead of going for this slight distraction, I also moved my rook in for the kill now, just really maximizing the power, maximizing the activity of my pieces. Now with my rook on the second and also attacking indirectly the pawn on g2, I think that after king e1 I would have taken the knight on e5, because now white cannot even take on f6, because then knight d3 check would be killing. So my opponent played here king f3, and now I played my point, which was rook f2 check. And I still don't really want to take the knight on e5, because it would mean that I would have to give up one of my strong pawns on e3 or g3, and I really wanted them to make my day. So I'm not just going for the knight, I just want to promote one of my pawns, which is much more convincing in the end. So rook f2 I played here, rook f2 is forced of course, and here g takes f2. And we see that these two pawns are going to decide the day, of course. Well, rook h1 was played to try and defend against f1 queens. It would not be possible to do that with king e2, because then I had planned the very nice bishop d1 check, and of course here king f1 would lead to a very cute mate with e2 checkmate. But my opponent played here rook h1, and now I had planned bishop e4 check. And after this move my opponent resigned. I think he has to go to e2. Now still I don't really want to take the knight on e5, because then he takes my pawn on my pawn on e3, but I think I would just go bishop takes g2, frustrating him completely, and just promoting the pawn on the next move, or the move after. So after bishop e4 my opponent resigned. I was very happy with this game, because I guess I played it quite decently from a strategic point of view, just going for light square control, but just also minding my dark squares, defending my dark squares. Then I liked the fact that I saw this trick with rook f8, preventing him from taking dark square control with his bishop on the g1 a7 diagonal. And then of course when he fell for the trap, it was basically all about technique. I was happy that I found the right setup for my pieces on the king side to attack his e4 pawn, that I was able to bring in all the pieces, also the second knight and the rook along the d file. So that meant that our team was up at least 1 point. This game was played a day before the regular playing day, and the rest of the team made it work on the next day, so that was very nice. Well, that ends our analysis of this game. I hope you enjoyed it and found it educational. If you want to get better at chess, then consider enrolling into our Better Your Chess University, or contact me for private lessons. I'll be happy to train you. Thanks for your attention, and see you in the next video. Bye bye.